What kind of a relationship did Zelda La Grange have with the late former President Nelson Mandela? Is mutual respect among South Africans declining since Mandela's death? Why were some of Mandela family members unhappy with the release of Zelda La Grange's book? What makes the book Good Morning, Mr. Mandela different from all the other books written about Mr. Mandela? What time is it? It's question time. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Mpho Tsedu. It is a year since the world-renowned former President Tata Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela passed on. Though the reality of his death has not sunk in, it is expected that millions of South Africans intend to commemorate his passing on by maintaining his legacy. But not everybody had the privilege of intimately knowing him, like Zelda La Grange. Today, we ask, how did a young Afrikaner woman become the former president's PA, gatekeeper, and friend for almost 20 years? She joins us in studio today to tell us more about her times with Nelson Mandela. Zelda, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mpho.
You are just as scarce as the man himself.
No, really not. Just
okay.
Very busy.
Alrighty. Now, let's talk about, firstly, 5th December. Where were you when you heard the news? How did you hear the news and what happened?
I was at home. I lived in Midrand at the time, and I was home alone, and I received a message from Mrs. Michelle late afternoon to ask me to inform a few of Madiba's close friends, people who would not normally be informed if something happened through government structures. And she asked me, she instructed me to basically call them and tell them that things weren't looking good. That's all she said. And knowing Mrs. Michelle as well over the years, and you know, I knew she wouldn't say something like that without it really being serious. Then I started making those calls, informing people, people like Mr. Kathrada, George Bizos, Mr. Mbeki, and so on. And yes, I was at home, and then I suddenly saw that my cell phone was just going crazy, telephone calls and people trying to reach me, and I kind of just knew it had happened. Up to now, no one has called me. I didn't watch the president's announcement that night on TV. I realized, you know, I had to prepare myself for the 10 days ahead. So I went to bed without speaking to anyone, and only really got confirmation of his passing the next morning. Okay.
Now, how did you then deal with the reality that indeed he has passed on?
I think a year after, Mpho, it still hasn't sunk in completely. You know, you almost go into a state where you have to remind yourself continuously that he's really gone.
Yes.
To be so close to someone for so many years, you know, it's very difficult to take that step away, and it is a constant. You have to constantly remind yourself that it's really happened. It's very difficult, but you have to take that emotional roller coaster. And I think, you know, the first birthday is always his birthday was very difficult. The first Christmas was very difficult, and you kind of grow closer to people who go through this type of emotion at the same time, and you deal with it accordingly.
Do you consider yourself lucky, and in turn, Afrikaner woman working in the presidency, finally making it into his office, because he says she must be part of my team? And indeed, ensuring that during his presidency and beyond, he is well taken care of administratively.
I wouldn't say lucky. Yes, lucky, but more privileged and blessed. There was nothing that could point that I deserved any of the privileges to work alongside someone like him for so many years. It was a process, of course. Madiba recognized commitment and loyalty and dedication in me, and that is really what set me apart from other people, and why he then chose me to remain in his services beyond retirement. But that's all it is. At first, there was some strategy behind it when he invited me to accompany him on a state visit to Japan. I was the Afrikaner in that delegation, and he he wanted to show the world that going forward, South Africa was going to be inclusive of all its people.
Yeah.
And then you take on that challenge or not. You walk away from it or you take it. And after the publication of my book, people now say, oh, so you were just the white token. And I say to them, wouldn't you have wanted to be the white token?
Okay.
So it's obviously it's a privilege.
It's a privilege. You're quite young then. You're coming from this Afrikaner family. Your father, fairly enough a conservative.
Okay.
You were watching Nelson Mandela's release on television, and he says, "Yerrot, the terrorist is 8 no."
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The terrorist is out. We are in trouble. Then here you are working with the terrorist. How did he feel?
It took him some time to get used to it. First of all, I don't think I didn't expect I would ever meet Madiba. You work in his office, but you don't think you'll ever become close to the president. And they say if you have children, you'll understand that if a person is good to you, to your child, you grow to appreciate that person as well. And that was therefore a very natural process that evolved over the years. My father, my parents both saw how committed and loyal I was to my job, and I obviously spoke about Madiba and about our interactions, and they started appreciating him and liking him and changing their own thinking.
Okay. Was it the right time to write the book? Only after his death?
Is there ever going to be a right time for anything? No. It was, to me, it was important as part of the process that I'm going through to release the story and my part of the story. And there was a lot of questions following his passing, and I felt I had an obligation also to answer to some of those questions.
Okay. Now, what was your take that some of the family members were not happy with the book?
Mpo, you'll never ever in your life do anything that will please everybody, and I've learned that from Madiba. So I knew from the start that there would be criticism. I had to consider what is important to me. It's important to me to share my experiences and to explain to people how I've changed because of this influence I've had over 19 years. And the obligation to tell the story was much bigger than the criticism ever would have been. So, of course, I will defend people's right to verbalize their unhappiness about things, but whether I then change my actions is a different story. As I say, you'll never please everybody, so it is what it is.
Okay. Let's take a quick break, and when we return, let's talk about how different this book is from many other books. This is Question Time. Please don't go away.
Over 20 years now, South Africa has just been one big construction site, building houses.
This is the only country in the world that provides free housing. The government has done very well in this particular area.
What are the challenges facing human settlements?
Most of the people who move into urban centers are looking for jobs, basically, and that increases the pressure in that particular area. We know exactly what needs to be done where and how it should be done.
They were also building houses for married staff, and you had the married quarters and the hostels. And all of that stopped. What happened?
Nothing has stopped, Mr. Mateza. We cannot solve the housing problems on our own in this country. We cannot wait for government as well.
It's a joint venture, if I were to put it like that, between the public sector and the private sector, particularly in the area of mines.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. My guest today in studio is Zelda La Grange. She's an author and former PA to Nelson Mandela. Before we go into our second segment of the program, let's firstly have a look at what people had to say on the street.
Now, all I can say is that after the passing of Nelson Mandela, we've actually got the opportunity to actually see him being documented, his true life story, being documented on television. And actually, a lot of us young people have actually got to actually understand who he really was. And you can actually draw some serious and, inspiring kind of inspiration from who he was. And I think a lot of us now understand how his journey was panned out through his whole life, and we can actually be able to try and organize our own life as how he actually applied himself into his journey through his liberation of the country.
Now, obviously a lot of people would have, opinions about the old man and what has to happen going forward. Now, quickly, what makes this book, Good Morning, Mr. Mandela, different from the other, throngs of books that have been written about him?
But first of all, this is not a definitive book about Nelson Mandela. This is my story and my experiences, so people should not confuse it to think it's a book about Madiba.
Yeah.
It's about my process of change, and I think what makes it different is there's a very personal and a simple way of putting value to those experiences, and that's what appeals to people. I didn't try to be an academic and put value to the legacy of Nelson Mandela. I shared my lessons.
Yes. Now, you had the privilege, to be or to have access to some of the ugliest family feuds or infightings. Just talk to us about that. Let's talk about the period when the old man had to be buried.
Well, as you know, and it was reported on everywhere that there was a lot of infighting, not only the family but between organizations and the government and so on. And I think it was also a symptom of the shock and the pain that people were going through, that manifested itself in different ways, and people were angry and confused and so on. So it was, I say to people, there's unpleasantness in everybody's life, and this was part of my unpleasant experience around his passing and so on. So I reported on that, but it's just my side of the story. I'm sure there's many other sides that still need to be told.
But one can't help but conclude, and I would want you to clarify if I'm right or wrong. In all this, you seem to have been on Mama Graça Machel's side.
Working with Madiba, I'm working with this person, and then there's a wife as well to consider. Obviously, you're going to become close to that person, and as I write in my book, we did not have the easiest of relationships in the beginning.
Yes.
It took us many years of both working at this relationship until it got to a time where we could appreciate each other, and that in itself, I'm much closer to her than I think I ever was to Madiba, because we are both females. We understand the emotional side of things, and I saw what she meant to Madiba. I saw how happy he was. So you have to respect that person's space and that person's role then in Madiba's life. And if you really loved Madiba, you would respect her space as well, and admitting to the fact that she's actually the person that really made him happy. Now, if you then want to say that we had a very close relationship, yes, of course, because I was in Madiba's space all the time. It's natural that would happen.
No, I mean the fact that you seem to be saying the sidelining of Mrs. Machel.
No, and I stand by every line of that. I don't think, a wife should have been treated the way, not only Graça Machel, but a wife shouldn't be treated like she was treated around the funeral. How was she treated? Well, she was sidelined. Her requests were not considered. I write about it in great detail in the book. She was asked to accredit herself for Madiba's funeral and to move in and out of their own home. She's the widow, she's the person burying her husband. And I found that if that would have happened to me and I bury my husband, I would be very upset. So, yes, and that played itself out in a very nasty way in our lives, because I also made an undertaking to Madiba that I would look after her years and years ago. And suddenly I was paralyzed. I couldn't look after her. I couldn't make sure that she was okay because I myself was blocked. So you have to explain that to people. People also knew that for 19 years I was the go-to person around Madiba, and suddenly they can't get access to go and pay tribute to him or to pay their last respect. So you have to answer and explain to people what happened and why I wasn't able to help them.
Did you feel helpless? Is this something that emerges in the book?
Yes, very helpless and hurt, of course. You know, very emotionally. You have to deal now with his passing, and then you constantly run against a brick wall where you can't get details. There's no information. Even the Madiba's charitable organizations. You know, I was trying to help everybody, but I myself was not. You know, I couldn't help myself even in that situation. So it was hurtful.
How did it feel that, you know, coming from this person who actually called the shots, here lies the old man and all power is gone?
The power, I didn't think of the power. I think the emotional connection that is lost was worse for me. You know, suddenly you know, he's really gone, and you take things for granted in life. You know, he was ill for many years, and over many years I had the opportunity to go to his house and go and visit him if I wanted to. But I was also always so busy at work that you don't take those opportunities, and then you regret them once they're gone. Yeah. So it was the hardest part was really, you know, now coming to terms with the fact that you know, he's no longer there. So the loss of power, no, not really. Okay. I think people also exaggerate if they think I had particular power in his life. There was always a committee that took decisions around Madiba and in his office and around his business. So it wasn't as if one person yielded power around him.
Okay. Word on the street, we shall get to hear what people say once more. But for now, we're going to take a quick break. Please don't go away.
A huge part of this African growth is technological innovation. Governments here are working hard to ensure that the continent's technology matches that of more advanced countries.
High-speed internet connectivity is regarded as a utility.
As the continent battles diseases like Ebola, social media becomes the preferred method to share information.
People on social media are some of the society's most influential.
To find out more, join me, Phumelele Zondi, on Network every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. Our guest today is Zelda La Grange, author and former PA to Nelson Mandela. Before we go into the show, let's have a look at what people had to say. Word on the street.
A year later from Nelson Mandela, especially within the political situation that we're facing, things are kind of chaotic. You know, I feel that our politicians have really forgotten the values that he stood for and why he had to sacrifice his life for the freedom that we have. And I feel that we are actually ignoring the true values that he stood for, and it makes us look like joke in the world outside because they're expecting us to live to the values and principles that he carried. And when you look at the parliament right now, you're thinking, oh, what the hell is going on?
Now, taking follow-up from what the gentleman there said. You wrote an open letter to Madiba in the Sunday Times over the weekend, right? And in the letter, you say, and I quote, I think this is something you quoted from one of his speeches though. We require disciplined leaders and members with respect for their organization who care equally for all South Africans and for all people who live within our borders. But even as things appear, that was close quote rather, even as things appear to be getting worse, I am reminded of the thing I heard you say most often over the 19 years I worked for you. quote, "It is easier to change others than it is to change yourself." Just talk to us about that.
Well, you heard that young man saying, we all feel the same. We're thinking, this is a joke. The way people are disrespecting one another and one another on all levels of society. But then I think, how do we resolve this? Because we can't expect example from clearly the politicians only, because they are being consistently unreliable right now in behaving, in the public domain. So I think to myself, how do we resolve that? And then I think, but I myself get involved in spats on social media so often, and it's noticeable how people are fighting and are hostile to one another. So maybe if I take a step back and I start respecting people, even when there's a difference in opinion between me and someone, and just the way we relate and the way we communicate to one another, maybe, that would make a difference if we just all take responsibility. So Madiba's address there on his 90th birthday was specifically at that point aimed at the ANC and the ANC leadership. But there's a very deep message in that. We all need to be respectful to one another. And you can imagine the way the days of Kudesa, if people communicated the way we are communicating to one another now, where would we be? What would have happened with Kudesa? What would have happened when the apartheid regime and the ANC started negotiating, if they disrespected each other? The worst it got during Madiba's presidency was when he said to Tony Leon, "You Mickey Mouse." Yes, times are very different and people are frustrated and people are angry, and rightfully so. But it still doesn't give us validation for this disrespect and the slander and defamation and the insults that people throw at one another. You can't have a situation where I say to you, "You are nothing." Where does that come from? Where does that example come from? And do we leave it to politicians?
Maybe you must add honorable member.
Yes, order. And I have to recognize you before you say anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's despicable, really, to say the least. And if you really revered Madiba, I think you would go back at exactly what that young man is saying. Go back to Madiba's values. What was this man all about? Discipline, respect, integrity.
But I want to check. In your book, do you ever mention those instances where Madiba is not the angel that anybody thinks of?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not a tell-all book as people expected. There was a lot of anxiety after the first serialization appeared in a Sunday newspaper, so people were anxious. But it's a true reflection of what Madiba was really like. In the paper that you're quoting from yesterday, I said how many times Madiba, or on 2 occasions, Madiba, scolded me for doing things. He wasn't a saint, definitely not.
Sure.
He was a very, very good, inherently good human being, and he knew every morning when he woke up, I can change the world by changing one person's life. I can, by my own behavior, setting an example, I can influence people. And it's in anyone's ability to do that. We just choose not to.
Okay. You were accused by a lot of people, and I don't know if you do say this in the book, of being this racist Afrikaner girl who is gatekeeping, all the African or black people who want to see Mandela, you don't allow them. You were accused that all the white people who want to see Mandela, you open the gate, you are receiving bribes, all sorts of things. And even before we knew who Zelda was, we knew about her.
Well, if I say that on a serious platform, I'll have to defend it. But these things have been around for a very long time.
Correct.
And even Madiba repeated some of these allegations to me over the years. But you must also remember who's the person that taught me courage. And I didn't take this job to win a popularity contest. Madiba knew my heart. He knew my integrity. And he knew that he was the most important thing to me in my life. And that I wanted to meet his needs first and foremost. So those things have been around there. But, jealousy is a very nasty, it's a very ugly thing. And people will make these kind of allegations. They will always be there if you work with someone like Nelson Mandela. So I had to tone down my sensitivity and just allow these things. As I say, I was never going to win a popularity contest. You can imagine being the person between the rest of the world and Nelson Mandela absorbing that pressure. It's not going to be all nice, but you have to grow up, and women up and deal with it.
Something that you say in the book which you didn't have the time to say to Nelson Mandela?
Get that line.
Wanted to say I expressed my appreciation and my love and so on to him in person, and so those things, you know, I'm content today that I've said what needed to be said.
Okay. Why should I go and get a copy?
Well, you know, it's a simple story again. It appeals, because of its simplicity, it appeals to people. There's very funny things at my own expense in the book. But you also, people who've read it now say, after reading it, they get a sense of who Madiba really was. They feel like they knew him. And this book is landed in a very interesting racial debate space at the moment. And it seems to educate people about dealing with one another with a bit more tolerance. And for that, you know, I'm very happy.
Do you think you have contributed in any way to, to South Africans getting to understand what social cohesion is?
Yes, absolutely, Mpo. I'm very overwhelmed now, looking back that the book actually was able to accomplish that. But the responses I get from people clearly shows me that there's now thinking. People are thinking about things differently. And if I could bring about that, then I'm happy.
Whose PA are you now?
My own. I'm looking for a PA. Do you have a position available? No, I don't think I'll actually work for someone full-time again. It would be very unfair because I'll compare any person to Madiba now in future. So I don't have a job right now.
Okay. I'm sure anybody would be willing to give you a job.
I'm fine for now. Thank you.
Zelda, thank you very much.
Thanks,
and all the best with the
Thank
book.
you very much for having me. Thank you.
You're welcome. That was Question Time for today. A big thank you to my guest, Zelda La Grange, and to you for watching the show. Get in touch with us. Our email address, questiontime@sabc.co.za. Our Twitter handle @questiontime24, and you can also follow me on Twitter @Mpho Tsedu. That was it for us from today. Have yourself a wonderful time. Goodbye.